One. A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are delighted that you have chosen to join us this afternoon as we share on today's Let's Talk. It is indeed a wonderful pleasure to be with you this month, the month of May. We are celebrating our 5th anniversary. Let's Talk has been around for 5 years. It has been a joy discussing various issues with you, our viewers, and we are here today to have this special emphasis. We are going to be talking this afternoon about another issue that is of significant importance to most of us, both members of the church and the wider community, because this afternoon we are talking about childhood trauma and its impact on the emotional development of the individual. In a while, I am going to introduce our special guest, but before I do so, I would like to invite you to bow your heads, if you're able to, where you are, as we have a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity and privilege you have extended to us to come by and to enter the homes and hearts of viewers around the world as we share on today's Let's Talk. We are discussing a subject that is of great importance to many persons around the world. We are talking about childhood trauma and its impact on the emotional development of the individual. And we know that so many have suffered over the years as a result of various situations they've had in their childhood experiences. We pray that as we seek to bring these challenges to the open, as we discuss, as we share information, that those who listen will gain a better appreciation of the importance of this subject. Take full control, be with our guest in a very special way. Guide her as she shares with us today. In your precious name, amen. So friends, welcome again to another Let's Talk. Delighted to be with you. Today we have a special guest with us, joining us on Let's Talk for the very first time. It is my delight to introduce to you Dr. Vernice Sharpe. She is originally from the parish of St. Thomas, Jamaica. She's an accomplished educator with over 40 years of experience. She relocated to London at around age 5, pursued a formal education, culminating in a bachelor's degree in elementary education at Oakwood University. And then, of course, she taught a wide range of grade levels, kindergarten through grade 8, and spent 25 years in leadership roles, including instructional coach, assistant principal. She holds a master's in educational administration and leadership, supervision, that is, and a doctorate in educational administration and leadership. She served as a faculty supervisor of Grand Canyon University. Currently, she serves as the principal of the largest pre-K through grade 5th grade school in the Tampa School District in Arizona, US, specializing in supporting students from high poverty backgrounds and second language learners. So we are talking this afternoon with an individual who has vast experience in dealing with individuals who have been through various traumatic situations. And we are discussing childhood trauma and trauma and the impact it has on the emotional development of the individual. Our guest is a mother, and I want to say to her and to all the mothers viewing, Happy Mother's Day. She has 2 adult sons, and she's also a proud grandmother. She enjoys traveling, hiking, entertaining, and of course, her deepest aspiration is spiritual, desiring to be in God's kingdom with her loved ones. Dr. Sharpe, good afternoon. Welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you for the invitation.
We're delighted to have you with us. We are going to be discussing this very important subject of childhood trauma. Now we're talking about children. It's perhaps a good time to talk about children because in many Seventh Adventist churches around the world today, there was a focus on mothers. When we talk about mothers, instinctively we also talk about children, and we we will be dealing with a particularly sensitive subject. But before we begin the discussion on childhood trauma, let's talk a bit about the value of children in God's eyes. Can you share a bit about the counsel that Jesus gave regarding children?
Yes. So at one point in Jesus's stay on this earth, a group of mothers were crowding around, trying to bring their children to him for blessing. His disciples told the mothers to take the children away. And when Jesus saw this, he was quite displeased and said, "Don't stop the mothers from bringing their children. Bring them to me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And he, in fact, said, unless people are as trusting as these little children, they cannot possibly have part in God's kingdom. And after that, Jesus reached down and picked up each child and blessed them. So we see that Jesus lovingly welcomed children into his presence. He showed them love and care, and he even highlighted their faith and their trust, pointing out that we should have similar faith and trust in him. Also in Luke 17:2, it emphasizes God's fierce protection of children and the seriousness of causing harm to them, spiritual harm. This implies a deep concern for their well-being and a recognition of their vulnerability. Luke 17:2 says, "It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble." This verse is a strong warning about the consequences of causing a child to sin or to lose their faith. Jesus uses a very severe metaphor, being thrown into the sea with a millstone, something very heavy that will keep you at the bottom of the sea, to emphasize how serious it is to harm the spiritual well-being of a little one. While it isn't explicitly stated about the value of children, the severity of the punishment for harming them strongly implies that they're precious and in need of God's protection.
So
They're, sorry, go ahead.
if I may just interrupt you a little bit there.
Yes.
I just want to go back to the point you just made about the severity of the punishment. As I listen to you, I'm saying, well, that is indeed severe. A millstone
Yes.
about your neck is certainly going to keep you at the bottom of the ocean. And Jesus seems to be suggesting that if you cause one of these little children to stray or to be um, to lose their path, if you do something to distract them or to create a challenge for them, you're in great danger. That's my conclusion on that. That's pretty significant.
Absolutely. Yes, their vulnerability is highlighted in this text, and causing them any harm is seen as a grave offense. You are correct.
Now, so we're talking here about the fact that Jesus has, from what you have shared, seemed to place a lot of value on children.
Mhm.
We live in an environment today where sometimes, and my observation, my personal observation is that people have children, they don't seem to give too much care over whether they are in a position to take care of their children properly. In fact, I noticed a trend in some communities where lots of children themselves are having children and they are not employed meaningfully, which means that they can't properly provide adequately for the children. I would like to ask you from a professional perspective,
Mhm.
um, if children are that important to God, what are experts saying about the ideal environment to nurture them?
Well, Ellen G. White wrote in Child Guidance that adults, parents, are to create a happy, nurturing home environment. And that doesn't take a lot of money, but it does take a lot of care in that the parents have to be careful about what they're putting in the home and how those things are influencing their children. She emphasized that the home should be attractive, clean, positive, which would come from the the words that the adults are using. It should be cheerful and orderly, where parents lovingly guide and discipline their children. Of course, we know that our children may find themselves in other environments beside their home, such as school and church. These should also promote safety, stability, and security. We're speaking of the adults creating these nurturing environments that will positively impact both the physical and mental well-being. Scientists now know that the subconscious mind develops and that development occurs between the ages of 0 and 7 years old. This is important to know because the subconscious mind is a powerful force. It takes up about 95% of the brain of your brain power and handles everything your body needs to function properly, from eating and breathing to digesting and making memories. It also holds all the programs that control the way we think, what you believe, what you feel, act, how you react, pretty much everything else that forms part of who you are. So, in that home, if between the ages of 0 and 7 you encounter some adverse experience, they too become a part of what makes you you. So, in Child Guidance, page 199, Ellen White said, the earlier in life one contracts hurtful habits, the more firmly will they hold their victim in slavery, and more certainly they will lower his standard of spirituality. She also said, those whose minds have received a low caste, who have been cheapened by wrong home influences, by deceptive practices, carry their wrong habits with them through life. And that's from page 200. So we see the importance of ensuring that the environments that children find themselves in are wholesome and will positively impact that part of them, that developmental part of them, their subconscious minds.
Now, what you have shared just now, it seems to be suggesting to me that during you mentioned 0 to 7,
Yes,
and when there are traumatic experiences, that those help to make the individual who they eventually become
right,
and can affect them throughout the rest of their lives.
right.
I want to, therefore, it seems to be suggesting to me that before I decide to get a child, I should really give serious thought and attention to that because I want to make sure, I should be making sure that I have what it takes to create the environment for them to be properly nurtured. I suspect that a lot of people who are making children today don't, they don't have this checklist. Am I really prepared to handle this child? Do I have the independence to bring up a child? Do I have enough to make sure that they're in a nurturing environment? And they just, in fact, it clearly in some instances, the fact, for example, that there are so many unwanted pregnancies suggests that a lot of people don't think before they have children. I'm hearing you saying that if we are going to um, avoid that condemnation that Jesus mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
it were better than a millstone rather, be placed around your neck and you be cast into the bottom of the sea. If we want to avoid that, we ought to be very careful about this matter of bringing children into the world. Am
Abs-
I? Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So what then, if we just get a little deeper into the subject, why do we, when we say childhood trauma, what are we talking about? What are some examples of traumatic events, and how do we describe childhood trauma?
Okay, so Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, she's a pediatrician in California, did some extensive work on adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, and I'll mention those throughout this afternoon's program. And her focus was on treating the negative health outcomes associated with them. So in the past, many people didn't think trauma had long-term effects on their health, but she started to see that some of their health, the things that they were exhibiting in their in health were really avoidable. So she said children's natural response to ACEs has an extensive and enduring effect on the body. And I think that's what Sister White was talking about, how it has a long-term effect. So let me talk a little bit more about what these adverse childhood experiences are. There was a study, it was called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and it's something that everybody needs to know about. So the researchers asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. These included physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration of parents, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence in the home. So for every one of these areas of these negative areas, the participants in the study would write yes. At the end of the survey, there were only 10 areas mentioned on the survey, but as we get into ACEs and other experiences people might have, they're far more than 10. But for the purpose of this research, they used 10, the ones that I named, and for each of them, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was that they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. First of all, ACEs are incredibly common. They happen sometimes without us even knowing about them. 67% of those people that were in the research had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, or 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. And the second thing they found out was that there is a dose response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. So for people with a score of an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease. Now, I'm no doctor, but I know that heart disease is the number one killer in the United States. So, Dr. Burke talked about why this might be and how it does affect the body. And she gave an illustration that makes it clear why high ACE scores produce these negative health outcomes. She says the reason for this has to do with a hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs the fight or flight response. So, how does it work? Well, and this is a story she told, and I love it. Imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a message to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you're ready to either fight the bear or run as fast as you can from the bear. And that is wonderful if you are in a forest and there's a bear. She says, but what if the bear comes home every night and that fear response is activated over and over and over again? The fear response goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health damaging. So children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affects the brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, the developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed.
I
Now,
want to interrupt
yes,
you,
go back.
Dr. Sharpe. I want to
Yes.
interrupt you there a little bit because you're sharing a lot of information that I really don't want our viewers to miss, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to take you back to the listing. You listed 10 adverse traumatic events that can
Yes.
impact children. And I'd like to ask you if you can just go over those for me again. Let's just see if we can register. Of course, you did mention that they can be a lot more, but for the purposes of this research, 10 were identified. Can you
Right.
just share those again for me, please? Because I do want to ask you a question or two on some of this.
Yes. So the first one was physical abuse.
Mhm.
Physical abuse will involve somebody striking, hitting, punching, those types of things. Emotional abuse, that is people tricking you or causing you, when they say you're playing with my mind, that's the kind of thing, but doing it to children. Sexual abuse, of course, that's clear what that is. Physical neglect, or emotional neglect. So physically neglect means that child might be at home alone a lot, taking care of themselves, trying to figure out life by themselves. Emotional neglect, parents and other people may be in the home, but they're not interacting with the child. They're left alone, they're excluded, they're pushed away from whatever is going on in the home.
So far, I mean, we're talking about a situation, and I want to identify two of the areas,
Uh-huh.
because you did say that they're pretty common,
Hmm.
and I want to identify the emotional, where a parent may say things to the child,
Right,
you're not smart, you are ugly, or you're good for nothing. These are
right,
things, unfortunately, that some parents tell their children so that their self-esteem become damaged. right? The other area I want to identify that you mentioned there is this um the neglect, right? Emotional neglect. Physical neglect is it has its own challenges as well. But a
So,
child should be loved and cuddled and cared for and receive affirmation and that kind of thing. And if in the home the child is getting none of that, then I'm sensing that that is emotional neglect. Is it that some parents do not understand the damage they're giving to the children when they refuse to do these things? Or is it that they themselves, as parents, are not ready to be parents? And
um,
maybe,
yes, I listened to a podcast. I can't remember who the doctor was who was talking about it, but emotional neglect or emotional abuse may occur sometimes in our culture. I'm from the Caribbean. I was raised by West Indian parents. I also know that our ancestors went through slavery, and there were some occasions when um, parents of young children, parents who were slaves and had young children, would say things to make the people who were interested in possibly selling their children not want to. So if they said things like, "Oh, he's not smart," or can't learn real fast," or, they say these negative things to dissuade owners, slave owners, from um, finding those children to be desired to be sold. I know that a lot of that has been passed down through generations, and we haven't registered the harmful effects of it. One of the things that we know is that when children don't get affirmed, they by themselves can start thinking negative things about themselves. So you have to go above and beyond as a parent to make sure your children know that they're loved. Make sure that children know your children know that they're wanted. Because remember, they're not always with you. And so other people's traumas may be talked about, and they may be questioning in their own minds why, mom has never said I love you, or why, they're not affirmed by their parents. So there's so many different uh, influences
Mhm.
that make us emotionally sound. And I think for us as Christians and as parents, our first responsibility is to make sure our children are emotionally sound by what we say to them and how we treat them and how they understand their place in the world.
Yeah,
I I understand that sometimes it's not culturally the thing to do to keep expressing your love or keep telling your children how special they are, but there's a need, and with all these outside influences, not just from people, but from social media, we have to do the work that it takes to keep our children emotionally sound.
certainly, certainly. Now, you're talking about a research that was done on several thousands of persons, if I heard you correctly.
Yes. Hmm.
I mean, I want us to take that into consideration. But you highlighted four of the areas. I was asking you to go through the entire list. So
Oh,
can you
yes.
share the others now?
Yeah, that was five. So physical is one, emotional and sexual abuse, that's three. Physical and emotional neglect, that's two more, that's five. So parental mental illness. So one of the parents or both parents in the home are mentally ill. Substance dependence of a parent in the home. Incarceration of a parent. Parental separation or divorce. Or domestic violence.
So, and this is what I wanted to get to now.
Hmm.
Most of these that you mentioned in the second half, the last five,
Yes.
um, would seem to be more unintentional than the first five, right?
Yes,
Notwithstanding, the child is still impacted. So
right.
you mentioned, for example, mental illness of a parent. I don't suppose maybe sometimes people can develop mental illness because of certain choices, but I don't think anybody go looking for mental illness. So it is a situation where a parent does not necessarily desire mental illness, but it does happen. And what we're saying is that if a child grows up in a home where one or both parents are mentally ill, it's going to have a significant negative impact on the child. And then you mention substances,
Yes.
substance abuse, um, where the children are also impacted negatively. That is interesting because I mean, in our environment, there's so many persons who are are challenged in this area of substance abuse. And I wonder whether they take time to think about the impact it is having on their children.
Right. With substance abuse, the actual use of the substance may not be the may not cause the trauma, but the impacts of the use of the substance does. So, for example, if a parent is using an illicit drug, of course, we've seen depictions on TV of what it looks like. They're not able to get up and go to work. They're not able to get up and cook the dinner. They're not able to have positive interactions. A lot of times they're hiding it or they don't want other people to see it, so they stay away. Um, so some of the other traumas, like neglect, like abuse, occurs because of the use. So other people are taking care of the children, maybe. They may cause some harm to the children. So it's just the absence of thought while using these substance that causes opportunity for other things to happen.
The other thing, if we can comment on briefly,
Uh-huh.
is the divorce issue. Divorce is a pretty common thing these days.
Right.
Um, it is not. I believe that when most persons get married, their intention is that they would last a lifetime, but it seems as if it is becoming more and more frequent. And we're told here that this can be one of those traumatic experiences for the children that can result in significant emotional damage. Now that's interesting. Just at the rate at which people are getting divorced, it suggests to me that we may have a lot of individuals who are struggling with these ACEs, and you are saying that individuals who register two or more, in some instances three or more ACEs,
Mm.
that the I mean, I haven't started to talk to you about the whole matter of the correlation between, some of these ACEs and the kinds of diseases that you're talking about, heart disease and others. You did say that this information needs to be made clear, and that is pretty frightening indeed.
Yes. Yes. And some of the ACEs that were mentioned in this study are quite unavoidable. Children have no say in whether their parents stay together or not. And a lot of the trauma occurs when children get into their heads about the why. They don't understand, and parents usually don't give them any details as to the why. And so children start to believe, or some children might start to believe that they are the cause, or if they were not there, things would go better for their parents. And so that opportunity for them to kind of ruminate about what's causing the divorce or the separation gives them time to develop some negative thought patterns.
And I suppose, especially as we're thinking about when these things occur in that early stage of a child's life, 0 to 7, the child is not in a position to comprehend, a lot of this thing, and it's really difficult. Now, in the information you shared, I know you weren't quite finished, but in the information you shared, you you indicated that some individuals highlighted that they had 4 aces, some had 5 aces.
Mhm.
Um, this 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 is suggesting to me that we do have a lot of individuals around us who have had a variety of different traumatic experiences in their childhood and maybe having challenges adjusting in their adult lives without even recognizing that some of these things are going back to their childhood experiences.
Right.
Very. Mhm.
Absolutely. I presented this information, and I really need to preface everything that we're talking about this afternoon as to the reason why I got interested in it. I'm an educator, not a medical doctor, not a child psychiatrist or anything related to that. I got into it because we were seeing children coming into the school, and teachers were unable to manage their behaviors, first of all, or even understand what would trigger them. And when I presented this information to my first group of teachers, I was amazed about how the information resonated with many of them, but one person in particular, he now understood why he was the way he was, why he chose to live the life the way he chose to live. And he was brought to tears because he didn't understand that before. He had impulses, he had ways of thinking that he just didn't understand why he would think that way. Because, you read a textbook, the textbook said you should think this other way, but he was, automatically his mind will go to certain places. So, not understanding about trauma and its impact on your subconscious really leaves you at a disadvantage in how you perceive the world and how you try to fix what is broken. I know that once you learn about the ACEs or about your ACEs, the number of areas that you have been impacted by trauma in your past, it helps you to then give it a name, give your response to the world a name. And that's what some of those teachers found, and it was eye-opening. It also helps you to understand the importance of creating an environment that's safe for children because as they're developing and they're in our schools, we want to be sure that we're not the cause of harm. We are not compounding the trauma by not addressing their needs. And so, with the teachers not being able to understand why the children were acting the way they were acting or how to respond to them to make them feel better or change their way of thinking or change their way of acting, teachers were at a loss. And they still are because really what we do in schools can't help fix damage that's done, but it does help us to understand and point them in a direction that they can get some help.
But I'm thinking that you may even have situations where you are presenting this information to your staff, and your staff themselves may be thinking, oh, this is what happened to me. You,
Right.
so I have had a staff member maybe saying, Oh, I've had these early childhood traumatic experiences. This is why I'm like this. This is why I'm like that.
Right.
So that's amazing. You may have individuals who are struggling with their own identity, and emotional balance, when they're supposed to be caring for minors. So that's pretty interesting. It seems to me as though we need to have very meaningful relationships with our parents, and that's quite a a challenge based on what we see revealed before us on a day-by-day basis, you know.
Right.
Mhm. And you did quote from, I think you mentioned child guidance. It was
Yes.
I quoted from, you quoted two sections of Ellen White.
Yes.
The first one I'm remembering is about the whole concept of the subconscious, and how that is formed, and how the various experiences that we encounter help to shape that and to uh, interfere with our personality almost.
Right.
So I'm sensing, therefore, that a good number of persons need to do some emotional cleansing, perhaps. It's a good idea, perhaps, for us to have conversations with our parents if they're able to talk to us about, because sometimes now from a psychological perspective, sometimes just being able to confront the situation provides a lot of help. You know, if parents are willing to talk. As a counselor, I've had situations where um there's an early childhood traumatic experience and a person dies and they
Mm.
never really get to deal with it. And we have had to um, do therapy to the point where the individual may even have to write a letter to their dead loved one and articulate their feelings, in order to get help from that situation. So we're discussing something that is really, really deep here. Mhm.
Absolutely.
And before I move on to the next question, is there anything else in this survey findings that you wanted to share before I ask you something else? Because I know I did interrupt you.
No, no, we could move on.
Okay. So I mean, th- so there are traumatic experiences, we did mention, that are unavoidable, or, not necessarily abuse or neglect.
Right.
In addition to what the list that you mentioned, I can think of natural disasters that can also be traumatic. I can think of a child going through a hurricane, or a significant earthquake, or even war, which neither the parents nor the child may be responsible for. And those things may create a challenge in terms of adjusting, in terms of having to relocate, in terms of having to start over again. How do these kinds of things impact children?
So, experiencing these unavoidable traumatic events can have profound and lasting impacts on a child. They disrupt their sense of safety, security, and stability. The specific impact will vary, though, depending on several factors. So, the age of the child and the developmental stage. So, younger children may have difficulty understanding the event and may express their distress through behavior or negative behaviors. Older children may have a better cognitive understanding of those events, but they may struggle with complex emotions, how they feel about it, or existential questions. Now that this has happened, what does the future hold? So, I'm going to name a few other traumas that children may experience that they have zero control of. They're unavoidable, and they have a similar impact to some of those, like neglect and abuse. So children that are impacted by medical trauma, So if a child is sick, they have a disease or an illness, or they get injured in an accident, or there are some medical procedures that may be performed. All of these could be a single trauma or multiple traumas. Because if you imagine the actual accident that a child might be in will be a trauma. What they go through, if a leg is broken, to set that leg might cause another trauma. Any therapies they have to go through and the pain that they're enduring, all of those may cause different traumas. So, medical trauma has um, some psychological and physiological um, responses from children and even the family who might be going through enduring this episode or this event with the children. And this is not to talk about if there's a medical trauma that involves the parents in the home. And you can imagine if a parent is at home, but they're too sick to care for their children, and in fact the children are caring for the parent, that's a whole other discussion. Most children do step up and become caregivers for their parents, but what they will be missing will be that part of the childhood that would have occurred during that time.
Now,
Um,
now, sorry again
Go ahead.
for
Mhm.
interruption, but I mean, time goes by so very quickly. I know we have
I know.
about 10 more minutes, and I wanted to make a connection to in terms of relevance to our church community, because some persons may be asking, well, why are we discussing this? We are Christians and we know how to take care of children. But in reality, we do have a lot of malfunction in the world, and what is in the world to a great extent also is reflected in the church. In fact, in the Seventh Adventist Church, where we do so much aggressive evangelism, we are bringing persons into the church and they come in with all kinds of emotional hurts, all kinds of backgrounds. In terms of what we can do. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but in light of how much time we have remaining, with all of these traumatic experiences that our children can be exposed to, what should be our approach as a parent, as a Christian parent, as a Christian leader? What should be my approach? What should I therefore be saying to parents in my congregation? Or a person who may be listening, maybe a principal in a school, what should he or she be saying to his home and school association?
So, there's so much to be said, and we really do have to take into consideration all the guidance that's given to us. Of course, we're Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and we read Ellen White's um, counsel on how we should create homes that are safe from the traumas that we've been talking about. We definitely do need to think seriously about the choices that we're making, the decisions we make from day to day about where our children go to school, if those environments are safe, stable, and secure. We also need to think about um, who our children are with. And I don't, I don't want to sugarcoat this. I want to be clear that people outside of our homes have had traumas, and their traumas cause them to say and do things. Even children, um, your children may go to school and encounter children who have been traumatized by some adult or other children, and they may interact with your child and cause your child some trauma. So it this thing about how people are impacted by their trauma is so pervasive in our society. And of course, we can't keep our children in a bubble, but we can be vigilant and be aware of who our children are with, what they're looking at online, what they're watching on TV, how they entertain themselves. Those are the things that we really have to guard against and be present. You, as a parent, you need to be, you don't want to restrict your child from having experiences like camping or with the Pathfinders or things like that. But like I said, our world is full of people who have had traumas in their own lives, and those people may be near your children for whatever reason. So, as parents, we have to be available. We have to chaperone. We have to become a part of what they're doing, become leaders in their clubs. So you can not just your own child, you're not only guarding your own child, but making sure that the environments that all the children are in are safe from traumas. Um, you have to also build relationships with your children. Um, there was a conversation a few weeks ago about um, children are understanding why they were disciplined in a certain way. Well, in our homes, that should never happen because we are talking to our children. We're talking about why we're doing certain things, why the consequences have to be what they must be. And all discipline should be accompanied by conversations and prayer. No discipline should occur in isolation. And yes, a kid might know, oh, yes, I didn't wash the dishes. So that's why, mom is mad. But even when the children know why they're going to get disciplined, there's still that opportunity for you to bring the love of Jesus into the conversation and help them to understand that we have goals. Heaven is our goal. And whatever we do must prepare us for that. So discipline may to some people look like spankings and punishments, but to other people it is, okay, so you forgot this time. Let's put up a reminder or let's set you watch so that you can be on time to wash the dishes or do whatever. So discipline, I think it's gotten away from us and we think it's a negative thing, but discipline is what Christians have to have to exist as Christians. We discipline ourselves. We don't do what everybody else does. We keep our time. There's a special time during the week when we get together with like-minded people. There's a special time of the day when we pray. So we're keeping a schedule. That's discipline.
Mhm.
So teaching our children to be disciplined in all of what they do teaches them how to prepare for the kingdom. Um, we need to introduce Christ and his principles in our daily lives. And that should be how we manage, how we discipline, how we live, so that children will see that Christ is a part of everything that we do.
I mean, you're talking about a subject that can take us into
Hmm.
whole program on parenting. I mean, very useful information. But I want to get to another question here quickly. From
Yes.
your experience, I want to believe that you have seen a good bit of these situations, all
Mhm.
sorts of traumatic experiences, especially with what you do on a day-to-day basis. Is it always possible to tell that a person has had a traumatic experience? What kinds of signs might a person show that might suggest that something is wrong?
Okay, so your subconscious mind is inside. You can't really see somebody else's subconscious mind, but you can see the impacts of negative things that have happened. And some of the things that children exhibit may look like other diagnosable conditions. Some of the things that children may do would be avoid situations, avoid people. They may be anxious or they may be clingy to parents and don't want to, venture out into the school environment. Some children have general fearfulness. They're afraid of anything, afraid to try new things. Some children have this helplessness or passivity, or other children have high frustration. They cannot tolerate things that change, things that they don't like. Some children are restless or impulsive, and it definitely does look like hyperactivity or ADHD, some of these behaviors that they exhibit. But other children may have physical symptoms like headaches or stomach aches. And as you know, that there's a connection between the mind and the body. And so if children have things on their minds, it affects their bodies also. Difficulty identifying what is bothering them. So they may not be able to verbalize or come up with the words to name what's actually happening to them or bothering them. Inattention, difficulty focusing, or difficulty problem solving. So a situation may arise and they can't think of how to solve the problem to get out of the situation or to move on. Some daydreaming or dissociation from what's happening around them, sadness and depression. And these last two are probably the ones that we see and can identify right away when children are depressed or they have a sadness about them all the time. Those are some of the things that children are exhibiting in our schools. And when they exhibit these behaviors, and I haven't put in there the aggression that some of them have, some of them are very aggressive in that they're intolerant of somebody saying no to them, or they're intolerant of somebody else having something that they want. And so they, lash out physically.
Interesting. I we may just have time to squeeze this one question, but you may have answered a part of it, but I will ask just as the listener ask it. What options are available to children in traumatic situations, and what can be identified as houses of refuge?
Um, so my goal as a school administrator is to make the school a safe place, a place of refuge for children who may be ex experiencing these traumas in their homes or in, places other than the school. Um, I think as a church, we really have to do more to understand what trauma looks like, how we can help support, but we have to be attuned to children. We have to be attuned to their acting out or the behaviors that they exhibit so that we understand that, okay, something is behind that. We have to encourage children to talk more, talk about their feelings, talk about, what's happening to them. And some children are too young to have the right words to say, but give them a piece of paper to draw or give them toys to play with. And through play, you sometimes will hear children talking about things that have happened to them. We have discovered children that were being abused from some drawings that kids did. Nobody asked them any questions. That's just what they chose to draw. And it immediately sent up red flags, and we got to the bottom of it. And indeed, there was abuse going on. But those are ways that children can, express what is happening to them. Some of the older children may use journaling, writing, Some of them like to write poetry, but some of the poetry they write really touches on what they're experiencing.
And it is important to highlight the fact that a parent should not, or parent or responsible adult, whether you're a school teacher or otherwise,
Mhm.
should not conclude that because this person came from a Seventh Adventist home, because this person is in church school, because
Right.
this person goes to Pathfinder, that nothing happens.
Right, as you know, and I've talked about, we're at risk wherever we are. If other people come into our home, our children are at risk. If our children go out in the community to play in a park, our children are at risk. If we send our children to Pathfinders, our children are at risk. Um, we really have to do everything within our power to guard our children and make sure that what we engage them in is sanctioned by the church, first of all, but all those people who are involved have gone through that screening process or that learning process wh where they know how to identify abuse, as well as they're qualified to supervise children. In our churches here in the United States, pretty much every person on the board, everybody who may have something to do with children, have to have a clearance to do so. And if you can't clear the rigorous process they put you through, you are not permitted to be with children, even in a class setting.
Very interesting. Unfortunately, our time is up. We have to stay here. There's so much more that we needed to talk about, but perhaps one of these days we can continue the conversation. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Sharpe, for sharing from your experience and I like the practical dimension, that you're able to relate what you do on a day-to-day basis and what motivated you to get into this area as an educator. I really do appreciate it. You have shared lots of information, and I'm sure that those who were listening or who will listen later on will have lots of food for thought. Thank you. May God bless you. We appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule. We know you had to make significant adjustment because of the time difference where you are and where we are. We do appreciate it. God bless you. And to all of our Let's Talk viewers, we are delighted. Again, this month we are celebrating our fifth anniversary. Next week, we're going to be talking about a different topic, not necessarily related to children this time. But next week, we're talking about cancer-proofing your life. You don't want to miss that discussion. And we will have with us Dr. Natalie Graves, cancer-proofing your life. God bless you. Thank you so much. Until same time next week.
Thank you.